We are now on the record. Today is Tuesday, the 11th of July, 2017. The time is 1:44 p.m. The videographer is Joseph Casalnuovo from Ware Litigation Video. The court reporter is Jerry Potts for Williams & Associates. We are here for the deposition of Gregory Wheeler in the case of Charles Arason versus Gregory Wheeler and Robert Perry, filed in the state of New Mexico, County of Bernalillo, 2nd Judicial District Court, case number D-202-CV-2015-07702. This deposition is being held at the offices of Regis Office Solutions, located at 500 Marquette Avenue Northwest, Suite 1200, Albuquerque, New Mexico, zip 87102. Counsel will please state their appearances.
Thomas Grover on behalf of plaintiff Charles Arason.
David Roman of Robles, Farrell, and Anaya on behalf of Gregory Wheeler.
Kristen Dalton on behalf of Robert Perry.
The court reporter will now please swear in the witness.
Mr. Wheeler, if you'll please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you go ahead and state your name, please?
Gregory S. Wheeler.
And what's your date of birth, Mr. Wheeler?
11/06/1954.
And where do you live, Mr. Wheeler?
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
What's your residential address?
8124 Camino Paisano Northwest.
Now, going to January 6, 2014, you're president at City Council, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you recall an encounter involving Mr. Perry and Mr. Arason in council chambers?
No.
Do you recall where you were seated at City Council at that time?
Second row from the front.
All right. And on what side of the
South
gallery, I guess you could call it?
South side.
South side. So you don't recall seeing any interaction between Mr. Perry and Mr. Arason in City Council chambers?
No.
Do you recall seeing Mr. Arason in City Council chambers?
Yes.
Where do you recall seeing him?
I was sitting like this and he was down there with his camera, like right there.
And so in terms of that landscape, as you described it, if where I am, I'd be like sitting where the city councilors are, facing you.
Okay, you're the city councilors?
And so from out here to my left would be Mr. Arason?
Right.
You're right? Okay. And you were on, I guess, Mr. Arason's side of the gallery? Is that a fair way to describe it? It's your testimony that you don't recall seeing Mr. Perry and Mr. Arason at any point near each other in the city council, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree with me that there's allegations of an incident in city council and then allegations of an incident in the parking garage, is that correct?
I remember that reading the complaint, but I was not involved in that one. I was just involved in the other one.
But in terms of the issues, there's basically two settings, correct?
Correct. Well, I saw it later on Channel 13 News at night, so yeah, there were two sites.
Right. Do you recall seeing Mr. Arason doing anything in terms of videoing the city council meeting?
I saw him videoing the city council meeting.
Okay. Do you recall if he made any public comments that evening?
During my time inside the meeting, he did not make any public comments that I can recall.
Were you in attendance for the entire meeting, with the exception of the time you were in the...
No, because before we went to lunch, Councilor Garduno fired his shots at me about forfeitures, so I got to go home after that.
And then that's when you went to Jimmy Jones?
Yeah, we went to Jimmy Jones, and then Perry said, you don't have to go back.
Okay.
So.
All right. And so that was that during a recess when you and Mr. Perry and Mr. Turk went and grabbed a meal at Jimmy Jones?
Well, a couple things going on here. When we walked outside to smoke a cigarette, and when Mr. Arason came out, City Council had not declared its recess yet.
Okay. So they were still in session?
They were still in session.
All right. Do you recall Mr. Arason doing anything other than videoing the city council meeting from where he was as you testified on the side in chambers of city council that evening?
He spins his camera around and films people in the gallery, and I do remember that.
Do you recall seeing him walking around?
No, he stays with his camera.
And he wasn't in the seated area, he was on one of the side ramps?
Correct.
All right. And your testimony is that you were in one of the front few rows, but on his side of the gallery?
I think so,
Okay.
yes.
But you don't recall, or it's your testimony, that you didn't see Mr. Perry go over to Mr. Arason when he was over on the side with his camera?
I learned not to look at Mr. Perry way back there because you're going to get a job assignment if you do.
What does that mean?
I mean, if you look at him, he's going to go, come here, and he's going to give you something you have to do, so I try not to look at Mr. Perry.
Is that something you learned through personal experience, or was that...
That's personal experience, 20 years in the city attorney's office at a city council meeting.
So that's not
Don't-
specific to Mr. Perry?
No, it's not. Just don't look at anybody.
All right. I hand to you a still image. Mark this as exhibit number 1.
Yes, sir.
Do you have an extra one, Tom? Or
I don't-
Okay,
oh,
I'll
no,
just,
I'm
I can
sorry.
share with Kristen, it's
If
fine.
you don't mind, I apologize.
No, no problem.
All right. Have you seen this video?
No.
Okay. Is that you in the middle there?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see Mr. Arason in this image?
If that's him leaning up against the wall, yes.
Okay. And I'll represent to you that that's Mr. Arason right there.
Okay, then I will say yes, it is.
All right. And you're approximately, looks like you're, correct, about 2 rows in and on that side. Now, between these seats and the wall, there's a metal barrier, is that right?
Correct.
What is that area?
It's a walkway.
Okay. There's no seats over there?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So from where you're seated, you can see Mr. Arason, and you're facing the where the city councilors are seated. Is that correct?
That's correct. The dais.
The dais, thank you. Okay. And if I'm correct, about 2 rows behind you is Alan Banks. Do you see him?
No, I do see Alan, yeah.
Okay. Do you recall who you were sitting next to?
David Turek
Is that David Turk?
and Jennifer Bradley.
And are those city attorneys? Well, I know Mr. Turk was, but
Jennifer Bradley is as well.
okay. And folks behind you, do you recognize any of them?
No.
I'm going to hand you another exhibit. Now, this is an image from the same video, approximately about a minute and 13 seconds after the other video. And that's still you right there in the center, correct?
Correct.
And is that Mr. Perry standing next to the wall?
Yes, it is.
You don't have any reason to believe that it's not Mr.
This
Perry.
is Mr. Perry.
Right, okay.
And where did you say I am? Here still? Yeah, I'm still here.
Right.
Yes, I see
And
that
am
now.
I correct in, it appears to me that you're looking towards Mr. Perry, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I'll represent to you that Mr. Arason is right next to Mr. Perry right there.
I'll stipulate that that's true as well.
Okay. So there's not any reason why you didn't see Mr. Arason and Mr. Perry standing next to each other in city council, is that correct?
I did see them, yes.
Okay. What do you recall seeing between those two, if anything, during this time when you were in city council?
Conversation.
You saw a conversation.
I saw Rob saying something, and I saw Mr. Arason saying something. It didn't look heated or anything. I just saw them speaking back and forth to each other.
But you didn't hear what they were saying?
I couldn't hear what they said.
Okay. Did you see any physical interaction between the two?
No, there wasn't any touching.
You recall seeing Mr. Arason pick up the camera and smack Mr. Perry over the head with it?
No,
Okay. Do you recall seeing Mr. Perry kick Mr. Arison's camera?
no.
Do you have any idea why Mr. Perry would have walked down that walkway to go stand next by Mr. Arason?
I have no idea.
Do you recall what was going on in terms of the city council meeting at the time when Mr. Perry went over to Mr. Arason?
No, I was kind of focused on that by that point,
Focused on what?
on what was going on between Rob and Mr. Arason.
Why?
Just wanted to make sure
Make sure of what?
that he's safe.
You were concerned for Mr. Perry's safety?
Yes, I was.
Why?
We have a guy here that goes to city council meetings carrying a gun. And I wanted to keep an eye so I could get Alan if something happened.
What were you going to do?
What was I going to do?
Yeah.
The best I could.
What would that be?
Try to scare him so he doesn't shoot me,
How would you do that?
like I did it
Like you did what?
when he was in the parking garage later and I said, "You're a chicken shit motherfucker."
To scare him?
Yeah.
Okay. I
Worked.
mean, are you representing that you'd be a human shield for Mr. Perry if Mr. Arason had pulled out a gun?
I was trying to impress Mr. Perry, but I was more, later in the garage, I don't know if we're there yet, later in the garage I was worried about my own personal safety.
Had you seen Mr. Arason do anything to invite Mr. Perry down to stand next to him?
Nope.
Have you seen Mr. Arason do anything that would cause anybody concern that Mr. Arason was a threat to anybody in city council at that time?
Did I see him do anything that was a threat at that time? No.
Did you see Mr. Arason do anything to cause any inquiry by any city security or APD officers at city council that time?
No.
Are you aware whether or not Mr. Arason had ever been contacted by city security or APD officers for any disturbing conduct at city council at that time or prior to that time?
I think they were removed one night from a POC meeting.
But city council,
City council, I don't know if he was there the night of when everybody charged over the dais or not, so I don't know of anything involving Mr. Arason.
do you have any knowledge whether or not Mr. Arason had been issued a criminal trespass notice to disallowing him from attending city council?
That's not something I would know about.
Do you have any knowledge whether or not Mr. Arason was on any watch list for city personnel to watch for in attendance at?
No, he was not.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Wheeler, is it possible that your microphone will have to go?
How far back do we have to go?
Not at all, just got that.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Can it be behind this?
Let's see.
Or
You
is it
don't want
better?
it to tuck under the lapel.
So
Let's go off record.
All right.
Go ahead.
The time is 3:08. We are now off the record.
Why don't you guys?
We are now on the record. The time is 3:08 p.m.
Now, Mr. Perry and Mr. Arason are standing on the side of city council. What do you recall happening, if anything?
The next thing I recall happening is Rob went out somewhere and then he came back in and said, "Come on out, let's have a cigarette."
So they ultimately separated. Is that fair
Correct.
to say at some point?
Correct.
And then Mr. Perry came back and said, "Let's go out and have a cigarette."
He came back and just motioned to me like that, and I knew that that meant he wanted me, and then when I got outside, he goes, "You want a cigarette?" So I said I did.
Did he text you or actually physically come up to you?
No, I was sitting down like that, and he came up behind me and went, "Psst," and he just motioned me out like that.
And if Mr. Perry says we're going to go outside to smoke, you...
You take up smoking.
All right, and that's when you went to Civic Plaza?
Correct.
All right. Do you remember what level of Civic Plaza you were on?
Whatever city, I never know these levels. Whatever, that tunnel that leads from city council to the parking lot, wherever that tunnel that goes from city council to the parking lot, where that tunnel comes out.
That level?
That level.
Is that the level where you park your car?
No,
Where did you park your car?
in the city employee parking lot across the street outside.
Okay. So you didn't have privileges to park in the garage
No,
outside?
no.
Not even for a supervising
No.
attorney?
Not if you smoke with the CAO. You still don't get to park out there.
Do you recall Mr. Perry saying anything to you about his interaction with Mr. Arason?
No.
Did he say anything about his interaction with Mr. Arason?
We were talking about his vacation. He'd just been on vacation.
Where did he go?
I want to say Florida, maybe Indianapolis.
Had you ever had a cigarette with Mr. Perry out in Civic Plaza parking garage before?
Many times.
Are you aware whether or not smoking is permitted on city property?
Within 30 feet of the building.
So you can smoke on city property, but you can't smoke within 30 feet of the entrance of any building. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So it's your understanding that you could smoke on Civic Plaza?
Yeah, that's why we went out there.
Okay. Now, at some point, while you're out at the parking structure, Mr. Arason and a female companion appeared. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you recall what happened?
I recall Mr. Arason waving his arms in the air and saying the F word and saying something to Mr. Perry. And I said, "What's this guy?" And he goes, "I don't know. He's mad because I stepped on his camera or something." And I said, "That's that dangerous guy." And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That guy carries a gun." And so I started to go over there, and Perry said, "Don't go over there." And I said, "Well, we can't. We don't have any place we can run, so I think we got to go that way, see if we can talk him out of doing this."
Doing what?
Shooting us?
You believe that Mr. Arason was going to shoot you?
I believe it was a possibility.
It's also a possibility that he wasn't going to shoot anybody, right?
I know, but
If it-
I'm assuming worst case scenario. Let me explain the situation to you. APD security is still upstairs because the city council hasn't declared a recess yet. And when they do declare a recess, Mr. Arason and all the other protesters are going to come out that walk. I thought maybe there were other protesters behind him, and I see him cussing and fooling around in some kind of a bag, and he's got some kind of a pole. Yeah, I was concerned about my safety.
And so, out of concern for your safety, you walked towards him?
I walked towards him to try and chill him from the idea of pulling a gun and killing me, if that's what he was going to do.
Had he said anything to you about threatening to shoot you with a gun?
No, but he's a known person that walks around city council getting in squabbles with assistant city attorneys and packing a firearm.
Your representation is that he walks around city council carrying a gun, but no one has ever alleged that he was at city council with a gun or reported it, for that matter, correct?
I don't know.
But you don't have any knowledge as to whether or not anybody did.
No, but I have knowledge that at various times around the city hall area, I've seen him carrying a gun before.
You have?
Yeah.
When did you see him?
It's
with a gun?
quite common. A couple of days after Kevin Curran pointed it out to me, he goes, "There's that guy." And I go, "Is he wearing a gun?" And I says, "Could that be like a staple gun or something?" And he goes, "No, it's a gun."
You, Mr. Wheeler, saw Mr. Arason carrying a gun on city property.
What did I just say?
Did you report that to anybody?
No. It's his First Amendment right.
To carry a gun on city property.
Absolutely.
And you were concerned that because he was possessing a gun that he could be a danger.
Yeah, like all these riots that we've seen recently from left-wing people where they're in attendance with other politicians, and we tend to see riots and violence. None of this was happening at that time, but I thought that it was the best policy at that point was caution.
So, in support of that policy, if I understand what you're saying correctly, you walked over towards Mr. Arason and called him a chicken shit motherfucker to defuse him. How would you defuse him?
It worked, what I just did. I walked over and I said, "You're a chicken shit motherfucker, Arason." And if he had a gun in his hand or if he had a gun in his bag, he didn't get his gun.
How do you know he was going to get his gun at all?
I think it's a reasonable assumption to make.
If he had a gun. Another reasonable assumption is that he could have shot you. Were you willing to die for Mr. Perry that day in his defense?
Dude, there's no place to run.
But I mean, were you
If he's got a 38 or a 45, he can hit me easy. But if I run, I can't get away from him.
Do you have any experience shooting weapons, Mr. Wheeler?
Yes,
When was the last time you were at the range?
last week.
Which range did you go to?
I went to the city range last week.
What did you fire?
I fired a 38, I fired a 45, and I fired an M1 Garand.
What was your distances for the 38?
For the 38, I was at 20 yards, 15 yards, and 10 yards.
And what kind of groupings did you shoot?
About like that at 10 yards, about like that at 15 yards, about like that at 25 yards.
What position did you shoot?
Standing.
Okay. And under what time frames?
I did some practice shooting from low ready, which I always do. And how many rounds did I fire? A couple hundred.
And your groupings, in terms of your shooting, how many times, what type of firing did you do? Controlled pairs, failure drills, what?
Sometimes I did 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. I had silhouettes out there. I have a routine that I go through. I'm a cowboy action shooter.
Okay. Did you go with anyone else?
No.
Went by yourself? Did anybody vouch for your shooting?
Anybody that's ever been with me?
Were you armed that evening on January 6, 2014?
Of course not.
Why, of course not?
Because it's a stupid fucking thing to do.
To be armed?
Yeah, to be armed at a public meeting with people that you've threatened.
Even though it's, under your understanding, a constitutional right?
There are constitutional rights and then there's stupidity.
Okay. But even if it were a constitutional right, I'm not going to go down to the analysis whether or not it's proper. I mean, it's a constitutional right, is that correct?
Yes.
Aside from calling him a chicken shit motherfucker, did you say anything else?
That seemed to do it. No.
What did you mean by calling him a chicken shit motherfucker?
Well, I didn't want to use profanity, but that was the first thing that came to mind.
It's a fairly colorful expression, would you agree?
It's an expression.
Have you ever called anyone else a chicken shit motherfucker?
In my dad's day, a lot of people call people chicken shit motherfuckers.
But you?
I don't think I ever have used that before.
Okay. Had Mr. Perry ever referred to him as a chicken
No.
shit motherfucker?
No, he didn't. Mr. Perry didn't use any profanity.
All right. So you walk over towards Mr. Arason, calling him this aspersion. Do you recall if Mr. Arason responded?
I do not recall.
Do you recall any other persons in that area?
Just him.
No other person standing next to him?
There was a lady.
Okay. So Mr. Arason and a lady. Do you remember what she looked like?
Silver hair.
No other persons?
Not that I could see.
Where was Mr. Perry when you were walking over?
I don't know. I was looking at Mr. Harrison and Mr. Perry was behind me.
As you were looking at Mr. Arason, where were you looking at?
Right about there.
His head area?
His head area.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And if I understand you correctly, the purpose of walking towards Mr. Arason was to diffuse any potential for violence that Mr. Arason presented.
Right. And I wanted to impress my boss. That was part of it. But the other part was, I was a little bit scared.
Do you remember the last time you got into a physical altercation with somebody by walking towards over them and yelling an aspersion at them?
Never.
You'd never done this before?
I know from doing police excessive force cases and learning a little bit about verbal judo that's sometimes when all else fails, they say that's what you can do. So I think that was what was in my mind.
When you
is to
say
try
what
to
you could,
convince-
what you could do, what does that mean?
What kind of language you can use, what kind of things you can do to try to persuade a person but I'm not a professional cop and I was scared. So that's what I heard come off my lips.
Had you ever been in law enforcement?
No.
Now, you said that you had done this to impress your boss.
Yeah.
Why do you think this action would have impressed Mr. Perry?
Well, if there had been a gun, if I'm a guy that's willing to take a bullet for him, I would think that would impress him.
At that time in January 2014, had you already decided that you were going to retire in October 2014?
No.
Is there any particular reason why you chose to retire in October 2014?
Yes,
Why?
to take care of my father.
And that that was approximately 20 years of employment with the city, is that right?
20 years of employment with the city.
And your para pension was fully vested or proportionally vested?
It was fully vested at 5 years. It becomes more and more. You get a larger and
Right.
larger percentage.
Okay.
So at 20 years, para at age 60, I could retire with a full-blown retirement. So that's what I did.
Okay. Did you have to buy time?
No.
How close did you get to Mr. Arason when you walked over to him yelling this aspersion?
About 3.5, 4 feet.
Arms reach?
No.
Closer?
No further.
Further? Did you do anything with your hands?
No. Oh no, at one point I said, "You're this close, Mr. Arason.
What does that mean?
You're this close to getting your ass kicked."
So for the paper record, what you just displayed was that you raised your hand, put your thumb and index finger close to each other, and said that you're this close, meaning that you're this close to getting your ass kicked.
Correct.
Do you recall what Mr. Arason said in response, if anything?
No, he was pretty much headed the other way by that point. Him and the person he was with were headed towards the other end of the parking garage, which is what I wanted.
Do you recall where Mr. Perry was as you got up to Mr. Arason?
I've answered this 3 times. I'm looking at Mr. Arason. I cannot see where Mr. Perry is.
Okay, so you don't recall if he was near you or not?
I never saw him anywhere near me.
Okay. So you can't say whether or not he was close to you, nor can you say he wasn't near you. You just don't know where he was.
Correct.
Okay. Did anybody intervene?
No.
Do you recall anybody doing anything to separate you?
His significant other was trying to be a peacemaker.
Do you recall Mr. Perry saying anything?
When I headed over there, he said, "Don't go over there."
After you had gotten within 3 to 4 feet of Mr. Arason and raised your hand up, do you recall Mr. Perry saying anything?
No.